Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, Miss Imelda, as a lecturer in the literature course and friends from the S7A class. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hilda Sakinah, the representative of Group 2, who will be the moderator of the evening presentation. And the members of this group apart from me are Erika Putri, Nazifa Intan, and also Widaningsi. On this occasion, we will present major genres of fiction and poetry. And without waiting any longer, we will start our presentation this time. And Nazifa Intan will present the first material. Please, Nazifa Intan.
Okay, thank you, Hilda. Next slide. Okay. Uh, Major genres fiction. Fiction is a narrative force which is imagination or non-scientific composition of the other and not based on reality. In other words, fiction does not occur in the real world and is only based on one imagination or thought. Next, fiction story structure. Seeing the definition of fiction. The structure in the fiction type story contains an abstract which is the core of the story. Orientation so that it can introduce themes and character, as well as complication that contain the climax of the story text. Next, fiction format. Traditionally, fiction has included novels, short stories, fables, legends, myths, fairy tales, epic and narrative poetry, plays including opera, musical theater, plays, puppet play, and various types of theatrical dance. Next, feature of fiction. Fiction is fiction or imagination of the other. In fiction, there is a truth that is relative or not absolute. Generally, fiction uses language that is connotative or not real. Fiction does not have a standard systematic. Generally, fiction targets the emotion or feelings of the reader, not logic. In a work of fiction, there is a certain moral message or mandate. Thank you, Hilda.
All right. Thank you, Nazifa Intan. And the next material will be presented by Erika. Please, Erika.
Okay, thank you, Hilda. I wanna tell you about element of fiction stories. And there's theme. What exactly is this elusive thing called theme? The theme of a fable is its moral. The theme of a parable is a teaching. The theme of piece of fiction is its view about life and how people behave. In fiction, the theme is not intended to teach or preach. In fact, it is not presented directly at all. You extract it from the character, action, and setting that make up the story. In other words, you must figure out the theme yourself. And there's a character. There are two meanings for the word character. Number one, the person in a work of fiction, and number two, the characteristic of a person. Person in a work of fiction, antagonist and protagonist. One character is clearly central to a story, with all major events having some connection to this character. See, the protagonist or the character in opposition to the main character is called the antagonist. The characteristic of a person, in order for a story to seem real to the reader, its character must seem real. Characterization is the information the author gives the reader about the character themselves. The author may reveal a character in several ways: his or physical appearance, what he says, thinks, feels, and dreams, what he does or does not to do, what others say about him, and how others react to him. And there's a plot. A plot is a causal sequence of events, the why for the thing that happened in the story. The plot draws the reader into the character's life and helps the reader understand and the choice that the characters make. A plot structure is the way in which the story elements are arranged. Writers vary structure depending on the needs of the story. For example, in a mystery, the author will withhold plot exposition until later in the story. And there's a conflict. It's the essence of fiction. It creates plot. The conflicts we encounter can usually be identified as one of four kinds. Often more than one kind of conflict is taking place at the same time. In every case, however, the existence of conflict enhances the reader's understanding of a character and creates the suspense and interest that make you want to continue reading. And there's a climax. The conflict has reached a high level of intensity and is an unavoidable event. And there's setting. Writers describe the world they know. Size, sound, colors, and texture are vividly painted in words as an artist paints image on a canvas. A writer imagines a story to be happening in a place that is rooted in or her mind. Okay, next slide, Hilda. Okay, fiction genre. Fiction is generally divided into a number of genre sections of fiction, each discussed by style, narrative technique, media content, or popularly defined criteria. Although a work is classified as imaginary, it belongs to a class called nonfiction, which is a form of fiction whose basic story is a fact. Included in the nonfiction fiction are historical fiction. Historical fiction is set in a real place during a culturally recognizable time. The detail and the action in the story can be a mix of actual events and ones from the author's imagination as they fill in the gaps. Character can be pure fiction or based on real people. And there's science fiction. Science fiction is a genre of speculative fiction which typically deals with imaginative and futuristic concepts such as advanced science and technology. And there's biori- biographical fiction. Biographical fiction is made up of books that are based on a historical person with fiction aspect added. The time period of the person's life may be accurate, for instance, but the circumstance of their life may be changed. Next slide, Hilda. Okay, thank you. For me,
Okay, thank you, Erika. And for the next material will be presented by me, Hilda Sakina. Major genre poetry. Poetry is a type of writing that use language to express imaginative and emotional qualities instead of or in additional to meaning. Poetry might be written as individual poems or included in other written forms as in dramatic poetry, hymns, or song lyric, and poetry contains its own aesthetic value. And physical elements elements of poetry. The first is dictation. Dictation is a determination of the right words in poetry, choosing the right words that aims to liven up the situation, create feeling, and show the beauty of poetry. And number two, figure of speech. Majas is a style of language in the form of a figure of speech. Poetry writers usually use figurative language to make the poem look beautiful and interesting. Figurative language aims to convey what the authors of the poems wants. And the number three, rhyme or sounds elements. Rhyme or sounds elements or can be referred to as rhyme, an intermittent repetition of a sound, either within a rhyme line or at the end of a line in a rhyme. And the repetition of these sounds is intended to add to the melody's value of the poem, and in other words, giving effect to the sounds and atmosphere referred to in the poem. And the next material will be presented by Vida Ningsi. Please, Vida.
Thank you, Matilda. I will present about characteristic of poetry. Writing poetry is forged in the form of stanzas consisting of lines, not paragraphs. Fiction used in poetry is usually figurative, dense, and beautiful. The use of figure of speech is very dominant in the language of poetry. The choice of diction used takes into account the presence of rhyme and rhyme. In poetry setting, plot and characters are not so highlighted in the discourse. Feature of old poetry. The first is animals or unknown name of the author of the poem. The second is bound to the number of lines, rhyme, rhythm, diction, intonation, and so on. The next is having aesthetic or fixed and polite style of language. And the last is it is an oral literature because it is conveyed and taught by word of mouth. Next, please. Type of poetry. There are various types of poetry that are developing today. The forms are old poetry. Old poetry is poetry produced before the 20th century. This type of poetry is divided into several types, including the first is poem, tale, karima, seloka, gurindam, poetry, talibun, and new poetry. New poetry is poetry that is clear that old poetry, both in the number of lines, syllable, and rhyme. Some of the new types of poetry is follow uh, ballads, hymn or gita puja, ode, epigram, romance, elegy, satire, rusticon, adultery, quaternary, wine, septet, septima, octave, or stanza. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Vida. All right. Thank you for my friends who have presented the materials. And here I will read the conclusion of this material tonight. The conclusion is characters and events in a fictional world might be set in their own context that is completely separate from the real world. A self-contained fictional universe, seeing the definition of fiction, and the structure in the fiction type story contains an abstract which is the core of the story, and orientation so that it can introduce the times and characters, as well as complication that contains the climax of the story text. In a work of fiction, there is a certain moral message or mandate elements of fiction stories theme, and namely the general basic idea in a work contained therein. Although a work is classified as imaginary, it belongs to a class called nonfiction, fiction, which is a form of fiction whose basic story is a fact. And as a moderator, I will say thank you for your attention and cooperation, and I will end this presentation tonight. Thank you for Erika, Nazifa Intan, and Widaningsi for this presentation tonight. Thank you.